An equity incentive plan is a way of offering compensation that is exempt from registration of securities. It comes in many forms and has several requirements and guidelines, so let's take a look how an equity incentive plan can be beneficial for your company. Equity incentive plans are used to compensate service providers. In the early stages, companies use equity to compensate key individuals in lieu of cash until they get off the ground. Equity is a great way to attract talented professionals to your company, and it builds team spirit while keeping your company financials in good position. Caution must be taken to avoid giving too much of your equity away. The types of roles for which you may grant equity are vast, from your highest C-level employees to advisors, web developers, and other executives. Many service providers may be eligible to receive equity from your equity incentive plan. The amount of equity you give each of your service providers depends on many things, as you see here. Proper consideration should be taken before you grant equity, so you have a good amount of equity to give to several key service providers. When evaluating how much equity to give your service providers, you must establish what your equity is worth. Section 409A of the Internal Revenue Code regulates non-qualified deferred compensation paid to service providers. To avoid negative tax treatment and excise taxes, the company will need to ensure that the equity is issued with an exercise price that is at least equal to the fair market value of the underlying stock on the date of the grant. Pursuant to Section 409A, the Internal Revenue Service requires that a non-publicly traded company determine the fair market value of their stock by the reasonable application of a reasonable valuation method. There are 3 409A safe harbors available to companies that the IRS will presume to comply with 409A. Independent appraisal is reasonable if it is conducted within 12 months of the relevant transaction and is performed by a qualified independent appraiser. The company could base a valuation upon formula that, if used as part of a non-lapse restriction for the stock, would be considered the fair market value of the stock. For example, a company's right of first refusal to purchase employee shares at a fixed formula. Internal valuation is available to companies that have been active for less than 10 years and have no class of equity securities that are publicly traded. Such valuation must be reasonable, made in good faith, evidenced by a written document, and produced by a person with significant knowledge and experience in performing similar valuations. When determining the number of shares you would like to reserve for issuance under the plan, put together a cap table so you can see what the implementation of the plan does to your fully diluted equity. For example, most early-stage companies reserve 15% of their fully diluted equity for issuance under the plan. Although equity incentive plans may not affect voting control, getting an understanding of what your fully diluted equity provides additional feedback when determining the amount to reserve under the plan. Once your plan is established, you have several means to grant equity, such as stock options that are purchased later, restricted stock that is purchased at fair market value when granted, and stock appreciation rights, which enable the holder to receive payment in the amount equal to the excess of the fair market value of the stock on the date the right is exercised, over the fair market value of the stock on the date the right is granted. There are several ways to provide equity to your service providers under equity incentive plans. Most awards will be subject to vesting. This is to ensure that your service provider stays with your company until the grant is fully vested. A typical structure would be a 1-year cliff where 20% of the grant is vested and the remainder vests monthly over the next 3 years. Some other attributes of equity grants include, but are not limited to, a company repurchase option on restricted grants. The grants are generally non-transferable, and until the company appoints a plan administrator, all grants are approved by the board of directors.